The hardest thing when starting a new app is generally where to start coding. So what code do you write first? And with a new application, you are given a content view. And in most cases, people will look at that and go, I'm ready to start coding. You've got a VStack, you've got an image, you've got some text, and you feel like you can modify that code and start building upon something that exists already. However, very rarely do we ever want to start with the content view because the app is made up of so many different components. The content view is probably one of the last places we go when we start bringing all the different pieces together to form our final prototype application. The app on the left, for example, is a teacher manager where it manages their timetable, their times for working on different tasks and how long left in a lesson. And you can see clearly, just based on the colors and the structure, that this is made up of a variety of different parts. The top shows the time and the date. You have how long left in the lesson, how to start a new task, an activity, in this case, working on the grade book, or at the bottom, the teacher timetable. But each part of that app is broken into smaller aspects. And your best form of attack is to take your user interface designs and code one piece at a time. In this case, I'm going to do the activity row here. And what we need to do is start looking at that user interface and start breaking it down into code. So if you're working on your code right now, it's worth going to File, New, File, or Command N, and choosing a SwiftUI view. Call it Activity Row, and we'll start coding this view. So looking at it, I can see it's kind of broken up into two parts, the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So I've got two parts even to this very small view. The gradebook on the left, the title, is above the time that it took to complete that task. So the second I see two things above and below each other, I see a VStack. On the right, it's the same process. I see things that are above and below each other, so I see another VStack. Now those two objects need to be arranged on the screen. I can't just throw two VStacks in and just let the computer try and work it out. I have to tell the computer how are these two VStacks placed on the screen. Now since that they are to the left and the right of each other, they're in a horizontal stack, a H stack. Now the question would be, which one should I do, a H stack or a V stack? That's always the question, because we could also look at this from being the grade book and yesterday being in a H stack, with the 2 hours and 23 minutes next to the 8:33 and 30 minutes in a H stack. How you approach this is completely up to you. I may have written this up already and I have no idea how I approached it. I may have done it one of two ways. It really doesn't matter which code you choose, as long as that you're comfortable with it and you understand it and that it works. So we're going to take this code, or this plan I should say, and code it. So all code works down the screen, and in a H stack, it'll be placed below each other to indicate code that goes from left to right. So yesterday and the time will go below the gradebook and the time it took to complete the task. And you can see I've already done my File, New File and made a SwiftUI view called Activity Row, and it's given me a body to work with. So I'm going to start with my H stack, just as I've got in my plan on the left. I then have two VStacks. Now don't panic if you don't have all the code here at the moment and if there's any errors. We're going to try and finish our code before we panic about errors. When writing a H stack, you'll see that I've got two squiggly brackets. A lot of students will write H stack, stop, and Xcode will say there's an error here and that you haven't put the squiggly brackets in. So continue writing the H stack and complete it before worrying about errors. Same with the V stack. So we now have our structure and we're going to put inside of our stacks the two views that will display the information. I'm going to do a label and a text. I'm not going to format it, I'm not going to arrange it, and if you're coding this right now, it'll look wrong. But what we're trying to achieve here is to remove that blank screen, to have something that we can build upon that is actually relevant to our task. Obviously below that, we have 3 sets of text, and that'll go underneath each other. Now you can go from either modifying this view to make it look how you like to look, including a background, so a modifier.background to the closing squiggly bracket of the HStack, to .font for all of the text. It's really up to you where you want to attack this. You can actually stop here and make a new file and start looking at what other parts of the app you can code next. So for instance, you might be looking at the time and the date at the top of the screen and seeing a HStack with the clock on the left and the time on the right and a VStack, and start building that sort of user interface. But just remember, the best thing to have is something on the screen. It doesn't have to be perfect. So for the clock, for example, that's a lot of code and we don't want to attack that yet. So maybe it's just worth putting a circle on the screen. Capital C circle, 2 round brackets.